Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with today's forum. I want to thank everybody for being here. I've taken lots of notes. Hopefully I will be able to read my writing. I don't understand my own hip width, so now I won't walk into that. Okay, my filter is low, so no telling what I'm actually going to say. I do want to start off by thanking a couple of people for making this happen. I want to thank the Office of Research and Innovation for their support of this event, of the Research Leadership Academy, and a whole bunch of other stuff that supports research here at NC State. They do a whole bunch. And more specifically, I would like to thank Laura Kroger, Research Program Specialist within that office, and Genevieve Garland, our Assistant Vice Chancellor and Chief of Staff for the Research and Innovation Office. You guys are amazing, and you make these events possible for the faculty who are just trying to get it done, right? Because we keep showing up. Within the RLA, we have 3 hosts, myself, Sharon Joins, I can remember my own name without having to read it, and then Heather Pasul in the back, yep, so I don't think that the live stream people will be able to see you, and Jessica DeCure Gunby in the back also, off camera. So we are being live streamed, which is why we are using the microphones. Not that I can't normally project enough to put it out there. So I also can't stand still, you can tell. I'm walking around. That's okay, right? It's gonna be an exciting day. Our moderators, on the other hand, up here, our lovely moderators, they are also mic'd. Okay, I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a minute and introduce how they connect their research to communication and what their niche is there. But I want to highlight the fact that while I have a couple of stock questions that I'm interested in and that we were interested in knowing, right? This is really an opportunity for you guys to ask questions too. So I want you guys, after everybody's introduced themselves and we've gotten going, I want you guys to raise your hand, like we're in grade school, so that we can bring a microphone to you, so that those people who are out there in live stream land, wherever they are, sitting in their PJs, can hear what's going on, okay? Any questions? Setting the stage okay? Okay, very good. So we have 4 panelists who are amazing and are willing to share their knowledge and their expertise with us, and I think they will do a better job of introducing themselves rather than me. So we'll start with Dr. Derek Ham, and then we'll just move down the line.
Hi, I'm Derek Ham. I am in the College of Design. I'm an assistant professor in graphic design, affiliate professor also in architecture. I have a unique background where I studied architecture, practiced architecture, and then through a long path exploring different design disciplines, ended up doing a PhD in something called design computation, which kind of broadened even my aspect in what I thought about design, what I could do with it. Currently, the body of my work is focused on augmented and virtual reality and how we use that in so many different ranges, from it as a learning technology all the way to entertainment. And what are the implications that this has in our society today, and what can we do with it? So I have a little lab called the Mixer Lab in the College of Design, and a lot of the work stems from just that focus in that area.
All right. My name is Katie Mack. I'm in the physics department. I'm an assistant professor. I've been here about 2 years. And I'm also a member of the Leadership in Public Science Cluster, which is a group of people who are somehow doing science connected to the public engagement, citizen science, that kind of thing. And so the work that I do is, my research is in theoretical physics and astrophysics, and my public engagement is a lot of things related to science communication. So I do science writing and online outreach and things like that. And so my job is very explicitly kind of balancing these things between the research and the communication. Speaking of which, part of that today is why I have to leave at 1, because after this I have to finish up a research proposal. It is always a difficult balance, but I'm going to have to run off a little early, so I apologize for that.
I'm Adrian Smith. I'm at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and I have one of those glass-walled on-display on-exhibit labs there. I'm an entomologist, and I have a faculty appointment in biology here at NC State. So besides running a public display as a lab, I also make media. I primarily make videos and publish those online, both about what I do as a scientist and what my colleagues do. And I also teach media making to grad students here, mostly STEM grad students.
I'm Matt Shipman. I'm not on faculty, and I do not do research. My job is to help faculty, postdocs, and students here communicate about their research effectively to various audiences. I guess one way to think about that is that I'm focused on sharing research information with people who don't particularly care one way or another about NC State and are interested in the work for its own sake. And we're not doing that in necessarily a marketing capacity, but doing it to achieve goals like making federal funding agencies happy, facilitating collaborative efforts, whether those are industry partnerships or interinstitutional grant proposals, interdisciplinary work, all the way down to making an impact on scholarly metrics. And that's something that, whatever we think about scholarly metrics, we all have to care about.
Thank you very much. So you can see we really thought through who did we want to bring to the physical and metaphorical table to inform this discussion about what are the contemporary ways for communicating your research and getting your story out there, right? Because a lot of what we're doing nowadays, it's about storytelling. And it's about trying to convey to people that what we're doing is interesting and matters, and to provide it in a way that the audience can consume it. So I'm gonna hop in with the first question, and then you guys can be thinking of your own questions. My first question is, and for the panelists, you guys, we don't have to do like one, like everybody doesn't have to answer. If one person answers and it was an amazing answer, you can just say, yep, I agree with that, right? So we don't have to, each one of us, go through. So the first question is, what recommendations do you have to help faculty get started with promoting their research on media or social media?
Well, let me jump in here, even though I am the first one. You know, I first think about that question, and I think the buy-in is really the intent. I know a lot of faculty members, especially if you're in the older guard, might say, like, this is a new thing, like, why would I do this? I already have a streamline for where I disseminate my work, and I publish in these journals, and I do this thing. And for me, my number one intent of why I use Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn is because I really want great grad students. And if you pause and you think, how many of the grad students that you're going to recruit, and these are students who are currently in undergrad institutions all over, are reading actually your papers and your journals. Now, if you find one so lucky, of course, you know, you would want that person. But the broad range, the brightest of students, aren't really hanging out and reading those journals early on before they become PhD students. So where do they see their work? They see the things, incidentally, on places like LinkedIn, on places like Twitter and Facebook. So for me, as someone who really wants to recruit really great grad students, I think I need a wide net with a high impact. And what I love about what I do in that arena, I don't have to worry about the communication office in my individual department and wait for that and update the web page. I mean, those things could take long. We could present stuff that's hot, that's relevant, and then using the students in my lab as a part to do the posting. A year ago, I wasn't on Instagram at all, and my students looked at me because I kept on doing Facebook stuff, and they're like, Dr. Ham, we're not on Facebook. And I'm like, what? So, you learn from them, and for me in my lab, they're a part of the process. So for me, I would encourage us all, like, this is a really valuable tool to get the next generation of students into our labs and to our college who, frankly, are looking at this more often than those highly published journals.
Yeah, I would say, similarly, one of my PhD students currently found me through Twitter and stuff, even before I was at NC State, and then applied to NC State once I came here. And so it's definitely having a bigger sort of public reach is super helpful for that. I would say in terms of how to get started with promoting research and all of that, I think that if you want to jump into social media and stuff, you can always jump in and just listen for a while and just communicate with other scientists for a while and see what they're doing. And you don't have to just start as like, here's my big thing and here's my presentation. And you don't have to know how to do it right away. You can kind of show up and just hang around and watch what other people are doing and kind of just try and join that conversation. But also, your college media office and the communications office have a lot of great resources, trainings, and there's people will help you, with strategies for talking to TV and radio, and they will help you with strategies for writing up press releases and things like that. And so there are a lot of great resources here for more traditional media, and also just generally connecting with the public. So. I would definitely, use the resources we have here as well.
Yeah, it depends on what audience you want to reach, and if your goals are for a science news consuming public that may or may not be here or somewhere else, I think the best thing you can do is actually you're all in a pretty privileged position for that because you have his office, the university communications office, and you have one of the leading experts in how to communicate research to a science news consuming public right here. I'm just going to keep on talking about you. Okay, Matt. You published a book that's quite awesome. My partner is also faculty here at NC State, and she wanted to borrow his book that I have, and I said, no, you can't borrow it, just buy your own. So we have 2 copies of Matt's book. It's called Handbook for Science Communication Officers, I believe. So that is an inside baseball of how science makes it from a publication to being a news article on CNN, and what these in-between steps are, and what people are looking for in the in-between steps, and how you can best work with someone like that to make those in-between steps like the best and the perfect and easiest, so that you can basically guide a narrative and it will appear on Fox News, CNN, USA Today, like whatever. Like they literally write science news. And learning how to work with them and what equals good and bad for science news and how to play in an ecosystem is really, really influential for me in becoming a science communicator, and I recommend it to anybody I talk to.
I wish we had a stack of books over here that you could sign and
So do I now. I didn't pay him, as far as you know.
Do you have anything that you want to add?
I was just going to echo what Katie said, and less focused on me, but also what Adrian said, in that there are a lot. So my office, the News Services Office within University Communication, is definitely interested in helping address whatever your communication needs are, whatever questions you have, and helping you communicate effectively with whatever the given audience is, right? And sometimes that is going to be a place like USA Today, but very often it's going to be a place that's more discipline specific or industry specific. So for example, if it's an electrical engineering story, you may not care if it's something that appears in USA Today, but it would be really fantastic if there was an article about it in IEEE Spectrum. And that's something that we're really aware of and cognizant of and that we're thinking about. It's not where somebody brings their work to us and we put it into some sort of widget stamping machine and deal with everything the same way. It's a conversation where we find out what your needs are and figure out what we can do together to try and accomplish that. But it's not just our office in news services. There are some great people in departments. I see Michelle Jules here from Applied Ecology. There are people in centers like Aran Sisu, who's here. So like, you can absolutely always contact me and my office with questions, concerns, ideas, but you may have other resources that are closer to you that you can take advantage of, and I encourage you to take advantage of them, because this is what we do, and we're certainly not in it for the money. This is something that we're passionate about and we try to be good at.
Very good, thank you. Do we have a question, or shall we go with my next one? Thought I saw a hand. Maybe it was a fork.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
I also wanted to add another great resource we have here, especially if you want to get into things like video media, is the library. So the library has a great digital media group. They can set you up in a studio, they can show you how to use the cameras, they can do a green screen thing, they can help you with video editing. Like, there's a whole ecosystem here for especially producing visual media. And the library has a ton of resources, and they're very happy to, they're thrilled to get involved with stuff. So, so definitely check that out too.
Thank you. Are there any challenges specific to a particular type of media? And how do you handle those challenges? For example, critics, trolls, memes?
Yeah, there are trolls. If you do anything on social media, there will be trolls, and the amount of so troll is I mean, it depends on there are lots of definitions, but somebody who wants to cause you trouble in one way or another because of something you're saying. And to be clear, it's not always because of something you're saying. Oftentimes, it's because of who you are. And so anybody who's underrepresented on any axis is going to get more trouble from random people on social media talking about pretty much anything. So that's something to keep in mind if you do stuff on social media. There will be mean people saying mean things, and it can be a lot more hurtful than that sounds, and it can be really troubling and sometimes dangerous, depending on how things go. So this is something that can happen, and it's good to be aware of the fact that stuff like that exists, harassment and threats and things like that, depending on what you might step into in terms of topics or just people being terrible occasionally. Yeah, that said, I think that's something that it's not super common, and if you don't have a big profile, it's not as likely as if you do. So, if you're just starting out and you just want to talk about your lab's research or whatever, it's not likely to be something you have to deal with right away. And so it's just something to keep in mind that it's there. There are offices within the university that also can help you with, if you're worried about your personal security with that stuff, there are resources about that too. So I don't know. I don't want to harp too much on this stuff because it's usually not that big a problem, but it is something that can happen, and it's good to kind of read up on what kinds of tools the platforms give you, and have some kind of strategies. I mean, my strategy is usually just to block people immediately and report bad behavior and just not engage with stuff. Sometimes you might want to engage with stuff. It just you have to kind of figure out your personal boundaries there, but it's usually something that's not a huge issue if you don't have like a big profile.
Thank you.
One of the things that I talk with people about when they're, and this is a conversation Katie and I have had in the past with folks as well, when you're starting on social media, first of all, it's social, so you do, in order for it to be effective, you have to engage, right? You have to have conversations and things of that nature. And in order to be, I think, effective, you have to be sincere, right? Like, the things that you're saying have to be real. It has to be stuff you're actually interested in, and so on. But that being said, while who you are in your social media life, right, needs to be true and real, it does not need to be all of you, right? It is a curated version of yourself, right? You don't have to talk about your kids. You don't have to talk about your partner. You don't have to talk about what you had for breakfast or what your religious beliefs are, right? You can reveal as much or as little of yourself as you're comfortable with. And by doing so, that helps you manage risk to a certain extent, right? And also helps you with your just level of comfort, because if there are things that you're not comfortable talking about, don't talk about them, right? That's yours and you owe it to no one, right? So I think that that's really important. But one other thing that I wanted to mention, this is a total non sequitur, is so in the context of other types of media, like news media, that sort of thing, there are a bazillion tiny little things that you can do to help you communicate effectively, because giving an interview is really not intuitive, and giving an interview for video or TV is really, really not intuitive necessarily. And just the idea of going on live radio or live TV is like terrifying for many people, which is totally understandable. But there's training available that we can help people to walk through this to make sure that you have the highest possible likelihood that you're going to be able to communicate effectively through this medium.
That is really nice to know that you have the opportunity to maybe practice a little bit and get good feedback, because I do think that, these things are more unsettling, maybe terrifying for some people, not just being on Facebook, but what did you call it, Instagram? I do remember the week when my students told me that they would not communicate with me in any other form other than texting. And I was like, that's so silly. Why do you text, right? They were trying to pull me into the next, section of the world, and being pulled from Facebook to Instagram to being willing to be interviewed, right? Those are things that can be very daunting for people. So it's nice to know there's support there. Okay. And anytime you want to shoot up your hands, yes. We have one coming right behind you.
Hey, so I know that Adrian and Katie in particular, I'd be curious to hear from all of you on this, but you're most active communicating your research to the public on Twitter, and you mostly through video, which started as YouTube, but I know you've been using Instagram and probably Facebook. So I wonder why you gravitated to the venue that you've spent the most time with, and what are some of the constraints and positives? And then as far as, I'm sure Derek and Matt could weigh in on this, but I just know the areas you're in. And so why that one? Why video? Why Twitter? Why YouTube or Instagram? Pros and cons?
Twitter for me, because it's just real easy. It's very quick. You can just put out a very quick thought. You can throw in some links, throw in some pictures or whatever. For me, it ended up being a very intuitive platform. It's very short little bits of writing, and that is what's easy for me. I find video a lot more complicated, a lot more difficult. And I like writing, and so it's a form of written communication that's easy, and it's also extremely interactive. You can very easily have conversations with people. You get very immediate feedback, and you can there are sort of communities that form very easily on Twitter, and so that's Twitter feels comfortable to me in that regard. Partially just because it is a very sort of low effort kind of thing. It's very easy to be out there and to present, my work, my interests, and my personality and stuff without making a huge production of everything. So that's how I fell into Twitter.
I make the media that I consume and that I'm interested in the most. So I consume a lot of video. I'm interested in video. I'm interested in filmmaking. I generate a lot of video in my research, so it's kind of a natural extension of that. But it's kind of just figuring out what, for me it was figuring out like what could I be most effective at and what am I not effective at, and then what am I interested in, what's gonna like carry me through when like no one watches it, and like still keep doing it, right? It's what am I gonna get the most self-satisfaction out of, and what can I like merge my personal goals with whatever communication goals I have. if the communication goals fail, at least like I learned something and advance whatever my interests were personally. And if it, doesn't find an audience, fine, but, it's still something I want to pursue. So it's kind of sort of defining where's the area at which I think I can be the most effective and the most interested in.
Have you come to any conclusions about how your videos do on YouTube versus Instagram versus Facebook?
Yeah, it's hard to, nobody wants to leave a platform and click a link. So it's kind of, now I end up making things for each platform that I'm on. Like the thing that I make for YouTube is different from the Twitter thread or the Instagram post. It's all the same content, but it's tailored for that thing because it's hard to get people to jump from one thing to another. It's like, the click-through rate is like less than 5% usually, I'll have something on Twitter that 2.5 million people will watch, but only, 50,000 will click a link to get to watch it in the other version I want them to watch. So it's just kind of tailoring it for whatever platform that you're on. Yeah.
And another reason that Twitter works for me and a lot of other platforms are less easy is that, if I want to share my research, I do theoretical physics, and there's just no pretty pictures there. Like it's not, there's nothing, I don't have like little creatures I can follow around with a video camera or anything like that. I've just got, equations and graphs. And so it's a lot easier to share a concept or something with a link with some kind of like more produced thing. Than to put a picture on Instagram. I don't use Instagram very much, even though I know that it's like where everybody's at, because I don't have anything image-based that's particularly interesting to show. So you might have considerations like that. How best to share what you're doing based on in what format it's most interesting to people.
Derek?
Yeah, I do have an advantage being in the College of Design that the bulk of my work has a visual presence and you can actually see things. With that being said, because a lot of my work has to do with mixed reality, VR and AR, there is a challenge in trying to present that stuff in a flat format in the form of a picture. But when we think about like the overall question about how we're using as academics this stuff, I would not discredit Instagram using it to show you the culture in which the work is being created. So I would say pictures of your lab, pictures of students collaborating and working can be just as an effective tool to give people a sense of where is this great work being done? What's the environment like? What's the culture? And so I often will take photos of students in the lab and take pictures and post them because I think it's important for us to show both process and end product. With that being said, I really like LinkedIn's platform on what it allows you to do to write smaller pieces and actually use text, almost like a little old school blog post, where you could use photos, embed video. And what I often use that for is if I want other colleagues to go a little bit deeper, right? And just read a little bit more, read a paragraph or two. And that's a unique platform for me, LinkedIn, that the others don't offer. I won't spend a lot of time adding paragraphs or even text, and even on Twitter, even though it has that text capability. Instagram is all photo, but I love that LinkedIn's platform. And the other thing that I think we haven't really pushed at is that each platform does have the nuance of a culture, right? You're gonna get certain things in the culture of LinkedIn, certain things in Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and they all have these different social norms. So even the idea of trolling, I've never been trolled on Twitter. on LinkedIn. It doesn't happen. It's like it's a professional community. Facebook, Twitter, different story there. So it's important for you to kind of like think about what kind of culture is embedded in that social media platform, and then how you can leverage that. And then the other quick note I'll add, I would not disvalue the use of allies as you're beginning to build this thing up. It's okay to tag a friend, tag a colleague, bring them in the conversation as well. And that's a really strong way to get started, especially if day one you have 0 followers or 0 people. Find those people and bring them in and into your conversation with you. And that's a really great starting point.
What I was going to say at the beginning is each of the points that I was going to make has been made, so I'll just synopsize, which is if you're thinking about which platform you may want to explore, it boils down to, one, what material do you have to work with, right? So you can capture the culture in your lab, but it's going to be much easier to use a visually driven platform like Instagram, for example, if you have a visually oriented research portfolio, right? So if you're in design, that's great, or if you're in microscopy, or if you work with entomology or things that are just charismatic to look at, right? People love cool looking stuff, right? The second thing is, what are you personally good at? And what do you want to be good at, right? Like if you are really interested in taking amazing photos and you're already good at it, super. If you're not, but you want to be good at it, super, right? That's something that you can work on and work toward, as Adrian was talking about. If you really hate doing that sort of thing, don't do it, right? Like, why would you do that to yourself? Don't be that person. So what resources do you have to draw on? What are you good at, and what would you like to be good at? And lastly, who are you trying to communicate with? And where are they, right? Because the folks that you find on Facebook are different very often than the folks that you might find on Instagram or on Twitter or on LinkedIn. And so there's this sort of online cultural difference, but there are also different online communities, right? Like, so for entomologists, there's a very active sort of entomology community, for example, on Twitter. So who is it that you're trying to correspond with, and where are they? And those are the things I think that you need to take into consideration when you're determining where you want to put your effort in the social media context.
I have a question that was sort of touched on. Let's say you're early on one platform, let's say Twitter, and the question I want to ask is about broadening the reach of things you post. For instance, I have only a small circle of colleagues, and the small subset of them is on Twitter, and they follow me. Once in a while, if I post something, they share, and then my reach slightly increases. But are there methods that you recommend in order to broaden your reach beyond, the colleagues that know you and you know them, and they are also happen to be on Twitter, for instance?
You mean within a single platform, not broadening to other platforms?
Both, if you will, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the thing that helps is to join conversations. So especially on Twitter, it's very easy. You reply to other people. You contribute stuff. You share other people's things, and you form a kind of community, and then that helps a lot. So if you are part of a community, then that kind of raises you up with everybody else. But I mean, with Twitter, it's a game of trying to find the things that are going to be reshared as much as possible. And so there are various ways to try to optimize that. If you're trying to increase your following, I mean, things like posts with images get shared more often. Posts with like interesting, surprising information get shared more often. Posts that are emotionally charged to get shared more often, for better or worse, So there are various things that, you can kind of see the kinds of things that get shared a lot and try and emulate that if you're trying to boost your following that way. But like making friends is really a big part of it. Just kind of being part of an interactive community. People like it if you're clearly like engaging. I don't like to follow accounts that do nothing but broadcast their stuff. They're just not as interesting to me. But if there's some big account and I reply to them about something they posted, they write back, and like there's a kind of interaction there, it's much more interesting.
Yeah, I would echo that idea of getting into the community, sharing other people's posts, reposting, commenting on others, really being someone that's not just about being there, this is my stuff, to really get integrated into that community, resharing, reposting. When I go to conferences, sometimes I'm promoting other people's stuff more than my own talk from there. I'm like in the audience listening to that person, I'm like, oh, I'm listening to this person, and kind of like, if I'm really moved, and sometimes I do that more than reminding myself, like, oh, I just gave a talk here, and let me make sure so that's part of the community. So get out there and connect with other people's and promote as other people's work just as much as you would want them to do it for you. I think that's a great way to do it.
You can also look for spaces where there's room for interdisciplinary collaboration or overlap, right? Because that expands the circle beyond your discipline, right? So I can't think of an example because I don't know what your discipline is, but if there are other research communities that you are actively interested in collaborating with, see what's going on in that space. What are the elements of that community that you are interested in, and who's active there? If you have questions, ask them, right? Like it's essentially the world's biggest hallway outside of a meeting at a conference, right? So you can, say, you don't have to walk up to them next to the coffee station. You can just ping them on Twitter. But by showing that level of engagement, it becomes sort of a conversation, and it's an open conversation more often than not. And that's the social aspect of social media.
Make sure my mic is on. These have been amazing comments and questions, and I feel like I just need to be doing more. But in one way, I want to have a helper walk beside me and be like, is this okay to post? Is this okay to post? I feel like I would need somebody to walk that last mile with me. Let me ask, how can faculty navigate the line between being a scientist and an advocate educator? Because, there's we're definitely not supposed to go down to the legislature and engage with those folks and, tell them certain things without disclosing it, right? But we do want to present information so that we can broaden our understanding. So how do you all see those lines between scientist and advocate educator?
Well, I don't really make much of a distinction for myself, and just in the sense that my science is so theoretical that it doesn't have much impact, I think, on kind of daily life. So my sort of political and advocacy interests are pretty disconnected. If I were in a field where there were a closer connection there, then I would probably worry about it more. But for me, I'm entirely okay with sharing my political views online, for example. A lot of people aren't, and it's a personal choice there, I think. If you share your political views, then there's some certain fraction of the audience who might not like you anymore, and that's a risk, right? But I also think that for me, it's important for me as a citizen of this society and this planet to share my thoughts on stuff. So for me, I think it's there's sort of separate things, and they don't interact all that much. But I'm also just not in a position where it's likely to be a conflict, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think it's very much an artificial distinction because science and the history of science is inherently political. And if you're not aware of that, you're either historically illiterate or scientifically illiterate. So really the question is, how comfortable are you being a public advocate, period? Professionally, the only requirement is that you make clear that you're advocating in your capacity as an individual citizen or adult or whatever, and not on behalf of the university. But as long as you're doing that, then you're fine to advocate for whatever your position or cause is.
So if you were advocating and educating, and there's little distinction between the scientific and the advocation and the education, and we have these social media accounts, right? And we are, you say, represent it as your own thoughts, right? Distance yourself from the university, make sure you represent it that way. And yet, if you are posting pictures of your lab and the people working in your lab, aren't we then intertwined with the university? Or do we need permission to create these social media accounts?
So maybe I might be a little bit different. I don't know how you all do it, but personally, the lab has a Twitter account. The lab has the account. And so it's really funny, sometimes I'll post something on the lab, And then I'll be myself, and I'll be like, hey, friends outside that bubble, this is, I'm like, I'm doing double. And with that lab account, my one of my PhD students, who's the lab manager, also has, I gave administrative rights to do some posting as well. So when I'm posting stuff on that arena, I am usually I am under the umbrella of the lab, which is linked to NC State, and usually my department will, retweet it or something. So for me personally, I keep those different, and I have my own personal, and it's like, hey, Thanksgiving pictures of my kids and stuff there, but I'll also, whenever I want those things to intertwine, I myself will then retweet something from my lab or retweet something, but it's usually never vice versa. It's usually never my lab retweeting my personal account something.
Hi there. I just wanted to say that I think your question really pricked my interest, because we often take our graduate students up to the Hill, and so we don't talk about advocacy, we just talk about sharing the science. And so, so one of the things that we're trying to do at our center, the Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, is to work with our graduate students to make sure that they are able to articulate clearly why their science matters, which is a really super foundation, I think, for all of these other platforms, right? Because it's not about advocacy, but it's about if we're receiving public funds, then we have an obligation to inform the public about those findings. And if we don't do it and our students don't do it, then the science funding potentially goes down. So I guess I'm really interested in sort of the obligations we have as an institution, as mentors and teachers, to really train our graduate students to do that in really effective ways.
Thank you. It's an excellent point. Anybody want to respond to that, or we have another?
Okay. It's a little bit on what you were saying before about, in my case, still fairly new here, and one of my projects over the winter break is to finally set up a research or lab webpage, which I haven't done yet. And I'm wondering, does that happen through the university system, or do I set one up and then link, for example, from my profile to my own created webpage?
So I think it's department specific. In my department, there's a sort of department webpage where we all have very standard templates and we fill in our information, and it's all housed on the department server. But I also have my own personal webpage that has separate information and broader sort of survey of what I'm doing. So I would talk to your department and see what they have set up. I'm sure that somebody in your college office can help you set up a web page if that's if you want help with the format or whatever. But I think each department and group kind of does it a little differently.
To speak directly to that, I think that maybe talking to the department head, verifying that they're comfortable with the approach that you're going to take, and then talking to your college communications office, because a lot of times how we have done things is maybe not how we're going to do things. And so you might want to be on the front of that, so that you know what's coming, so that you're ready to go lockstep and leverage all their other money, right, that's being invested. Okay. Any other questions? How do you control the story around your area of research? Controlling the story. So maybe a story starts to get a little bit out of control, or maybe it starts to take a different interpretation. But I have noticed that on social media, things can shift very rapidly, right? And I've gotten pushed from my communications department in the middle of the night about things that were happening on social media, and they're like, you need to respond. You need to respond, right? And some people are like, no, it'll die out, right? But there are many different platforms. So for you guys, how do you control that story?
I mean, I think sometimes you can't, like, I mean, sometimes things just do get out of hand. I think a good thing is to keep in mind when you're telling the story initially, all of the different ways it could go wrong. For example, if there's a press release or you're giving an interview or something, you have to be really clear in your mind about ways that it might be misinterpreted and not to overrepresent something or not to throw in something extraneous that might take on a life of its own. So there are certain kind of defensive communication things that you can do by thinking about like, if this is picked up by somebody hostile to this research, how are they going to take it? Or if this is picked up by somebody who doesn't know anything about this area, how might they misinterpret this? And just be really clear and really, concise, and make sure that you're shaping a story that the media can use as it is, and they don't have to fill in a whole lot of gaps, and that will be easily interpreted by the media. So being as clear as possible, being as accessible as possible, using the kind of language that the media people are going to understand is very, very helpful for that, because then they don't have to do the interpretation themselves in a way that might get confused. So I see a lot with physics news where a physicist will give an interview about some result and will use some imprecise language, and then the media just runs away with something that was never in the paper, was never something that the researcher said, but it connected to, like, somebody said wormholes, and then like suddenly our galaxy has a wormhole in the center, and like it's this huge, huge mess because it wasn't clearly stated to the media in the first place what was really going on. So I think that you can be a little bit defensive about that stuff, and that helps a lot. But I mean, once a story starts going wrong in the media, like things can go viral very fast, and I don't know how to fix that if it goes badly.
Katie's point is right, though. You can, if it's related to your research debut, part of what you can do to work with the people in your department or people in Matt's department is to prep. Basically, you can view the press release as a media package. If you're really concerned with, you research something and people think it's this, so you don't want them to grab a picture, you can include whatever media you want with it into the press release. And the press release is not meant to be reposted, although oftentimes it is. It's meant to be a source through which journalists will pull and represent your research in a public thing. That's why there's a bunch of quotes. That's why he'll come to your office and talk to you, and he'll run quotes with you. And those are meant to be basically lifted from that, put into an article, and that's you speaking directly to your audience. So all that stuff is all preparation for better or worse, controlling the narrative of when your research comes out. So like a lot of the videos I make, I prep them before the research paper comes out. They get posted simultaneously inside the press release, so journalists can see that. They can pull that video from the release and then put it on their site. It's right there. They don't have to like make a new one with some random person presenting your research. You can actually talk about your research on that news site because you've done all the preparation ahead of time. And so it's really just kind of getting that as part of your publication process. Like if you're going to publish something and you know it has potential, then put the work in to realize that potential ahead of time and don't depend on other people picking it up and generating their own stories. You help people see and engage with your research and bring that into part of your workflow as you're putting out research.
When you talk about your process and your workflow, right? A lot of us are used to writing emails, and so we have different workflows for writing our emails. One of the parts of my workflow for my emails is occasionally I'll actually draft them in Word. There are a bunch of exclamation points. It's not going out, right? It needs to sit, it needs to be edited, right? So that's part of my workflow. Maybe I even have somebody else read it. Is it part of your workflow in social media, right? This is supposed to, I understand Twitter's supposed to be fast, Instagram, instantaneous, right? Is it part of your workflow, maybe not once you're really good at it, but when you're stepping into this pond and you're learning how to do it, do you have other people review your stuff before you post?
I don't think I ever did, but But I do think very carefully sometimes about how anything can possibly be misinterpreted. Because especially with a short format like Twitter, you can't put a whole lot of nuance in there, and so you have to be real careful. And there are things that I will not post because I can't make it stand alone, unmisinterpretable. Okay. So.
Yeah, I always rely on my students as the first line of defense. They're somehow like always on their devices anyway, and no one has ever flagged something as being incorrect or controversial. I do remember once there was a typo catch, but once again, my students were the first line of defense. They see things because the lab stuff is in their feed, and so I can easily pull it down. So, but now that you're saying that, it makes me wonder, like maybe they should be a little bit, give them more stuff to do.
Editing text, right? Catching spelling errors, content errors, errors in image and how you present things, who you photographed, who you've captured, all of those things have additional meaning to different people, right? And we have our own filter. So if I look at something and in my classroom, a lot of times I will use examples from my family, right? Because they're not going to sue me for using their pictures, right? So a lot of I teach human-centered design. So I have a lot of unusual pictures of my family in curious circumstances, right? And then when I stepped back and they were great examples, right? Because I was talking about the neck length of a collar when you're in the emergency room and the anthropometry associated with that. I thought it was great. But as I went back with a different filter and I looked at all of these images, I thought, wow, I don't have a very inclusive set of visuals within this particular area. So I think sometimes, even if we try and think about how are other people going to use it, would there be benefit, or is it just going to slow things down?
I think it's always a good thing to, to give things a second thought. It doesn't have to be instantaneous. Just because it's quick doesn't mean it has to happen right away. I often draft things and then sit on them for a while and think about it. But it kind of depends on your goals too, like what you're trying to do, who you're trying to reach, how you want your content to be used and read. But yeah, it's always helpful to be thoughtful. I would always advocate for that.
I think it would slow it down, and I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it works right now until it doesn't. I can see a foreseeable future where for whatever happens, bad tweets, bad stuff, a whole university shuts it all down and streamlines everything through individual. That's a foreseeable future. Right now, we're not there. And maybe I think that's a part of this conversation for us to really think through, because it's like, if we want the power, if we want to keep it to ourselves, we have to put the checks and balances in place, because the alternative would be no longer having that freedom to just instantly post and tweet. And it's good right now, but until it's not. And so I'm glad we're at least having this conversation.
I had a slightly different question. I know it takes a time commitment to make a social media marketing campaign effective. How much do you put in each week in an ideal world? And if you only had 1 hour a week to contribute, what would you prioritize?
Well, I don't know if this is scientifically proven, but one of my students told me only Tuesday through Thursday. And that's what they told me. And so if it's with the lab, it's only coming out Tuesday through Thursday. And they're like, Monday, people are too busy back for the weekend. Friday, they're checked out. So if you go by that rule, that already narrows it down, right? 3 days of the week where you would actually put something up there. But with that being said, I think for me, it's waves, right? It's like right before a major exhibit or conference for me, that might be a higher wave where I'm just doing things in anticipation, maybe to meet with colleagues there, or saying, hey, I'm going to this conference, this is what we're doing. And even while there, it's on a high, but then there's gonna be definitely slumps and lows. So it's not I wouldn't say it's a consistent, this is how many hours I put in the week. And frankly, there could be periods of drought. But even during those drought periods, that's when I'm usually doing, I'll retweet, I'll read. So I'm usually active doing something. But as far as new content from us, it's not, I don't have like this regulated pattern. Really, the semester or the yearly ebb and flow.
Yeah, with Twitter, it's really easy to just dip in and out. And so, I'll tweet when I'm walking to work in the morning or something like that. Like, it's just, it's totally random how much time I spend on it and what I'm using it for. And so it's, I don't have any kind of metric on that.
Yeah, I mean, how many months do you spend doing a research project before it's published? It's like months, years, It's just, the reason why I started doing a lot of this is because when you spend so much time doing a project and it comes out, and then the 12 people in your field read it, and then that's it, and you're moving on. It's like, oh my God, that was all for that? Really? So, like, I don't see this time spent in making your stuff, approachable, accessible, and aesthetic as time wasted at all. It's like, man, I put so much time into this. Like, I want other people to see this and derive joy out of this, besides the 12 colleagues who may or may not be like plotting their ways to prove me wrong. So the time into it is just like, man, why shouldn't I spend time on this? Like, I spend so much time in the science itself. Like, this deserves that much time put into the back end of trying to communicate this. And if I had only an hour a day, I would, work on the same thing for 6 months and then put out a cool public thing 6 months later when I've worked on it for that many hours. Because, for me, it's not quantity that matters, it's the quality of the stuff that comes out, and because that's going to live longer and it can have a longer impact than flash in the pan audience numbers.
I have to leave, I'm afraid. So.
Thank you for being here.
I think one of the things that you could start, like I said, I have a bias. It's easy for me. I'm in the College of Design. So the tools and techniques that we use to communicate our stuff, one, the work is already visual. Two, those skills are built in-house. But in a previous life, years ago, when I was a grad student, I remember being hired as a designer through someone's grant to come in and make some things for them. And it was written into their grant proposal, like they would need someone in a communication. So we've all written proposals. They usually ask for a plan of dissemination. Maybe we should start thinking about, okay, I need to bill into my proposal. I'm gonna go over to the College of Design and hire a student or have a spot for someone to interpret, even something as boring as a graph, into a way that can be palatable for a broader audience. So I would propose for those who are outside of design like myself, start thinking about billing that in your proposal for those roles and positions for people to make the videos, to make the content, to allow you to do that. And then you're not gonna rely just on your own personal expertise.
Well, I think this is also one of the reasons that it's really important to think about what it is that you like or what you want to work on when you're deciding which platform to use. Because if it's something that feels like work, then you're probably not going to stick with whatever your schedule is the way you would if it's something that you actually enjoy. Right, so I think that's an element that you really need to think about. And we're talking about social media, and there are other forms of media, news media, and other things like that are worthwhile. You don't have to do social media, right? There are advantages, there are opportunities there. There's no obligation to do it, right? So if it feels like pulling teeth, for Pete's sake, spare your mental health and find some other way to reach your audience outside of social media, right? But, just find something that you have some enthusiasm for. I think that's really important.
Why do you think a very small percentage of faculty or researchers engage in science communication, though they understand the importance of science communication? And do you think if the science communication efforts are incentivized, for example, a score is assigned which helps the faculty in getting the tenure, or the one idea came up like if it's in the proposals, and do you see anything like that happening in the near future?
So I think one reason I think there are two primary reasons, if there can be two primary anythings, given what the word primary means, that people don't engage with science communication, right? So one is cultural, right? So every department, even sub-departments, right, have their own sort of culture. And in some places, it's almost sort of like socially disincentivized to engage in that sort of thing. It's not taken seriously, or is it seen as unprofessional, or what have you. Whereas other departments view it as really great, and it is incentivized, right? Like, hey, great job with that, whatever, that talk you gave, or that project you worked on, or that video you made. So I think that's a significant element. And I think that many of the people that feel that way, that are sort of don't think that science communication is very beneficial, tend to be older, and a lot of the younger faculty tend to be more enthusiastic, or at least open-minded toward the idea of science communication. So I think that there's a larger cultural shift taking place. The other factor is just that you have a gazillion things to do, right? You're writing grant proposals, you're grading papers, you're overseeing experiments and grad students and postdocs and writing papers and trying to edit that thing that the journal sent you that you agreed to do 6 months ago, and now it's time to do it. And then also you want to have a life and see the person that you married, or wave to your kids once in a while, or whatever, right? Go for a hike. There are just a million things pressing on you for time, and this is the thing that you don't absolutely have to do, right? So it's going to be, it's very easy to put that on the chopping block, and I completely get that. As to the incentivization aspect of things, I think that sure, if there is an actual incentive, then that would drive increased participation. Is that possible? I'm not sure. I mean, we are seeing it in some places. The University of Michigan, for example, has adopted that model. They do take science communication and public outreach efforts into consideration for tenure review, for example. So it is happening in some places. Whether, the extent to which that spreads remains unclear, as far as I know.
So I wanted to respond to two of the comments that were made. So at NC State in the College of Engineering, I'm in charge of the reappointment, promotion, and tenure for the college. So the last 10 years, I've probably seen hundreds of cases. And I will say that more faculty are starting to include their notations in popular press. So they actually put that in there, and they say popular press, Scientific American, or whatever, featured on a radio. So we're starting to see more of that. And when we write our letters at the college level, sometimes we actually mention that. So we can't mention stuff that's not there. So I think that if you have that, then you include it in your portfolio. And if you have a lot of it, somebody may mention it. So I think that that's how the culture is going to get changed a bit. And the other thing I wanted to mention was when you were talking about if you had an hour, what would you do? So I do a lot of Twitter stuff, not university-based, but my own kind of consulting stuff. And what I do is I use something called Hootsuite, and there's other platforms that people can use to schedule tweets. So sometimes if I'm sitting in the living room and I'm having, I have all these thoughts, I just kind of come up with a whole bunch of tweets or Facebook posts, and I do them all in one sitting, but I schedule them over the course of a month or 2 months or whenever it is. And then I don't have to worry about, oh dear, did I tweet today or did I whatever. So that's another use of an hour if you're feeling really passionate about something you want to communicate, and you chunk it out and send it out that way.
Let me put something out there too about the idea of scheduling things when they go out, right? And how we represent ourselves and the type of climate and culture that we want to work in. And we often talk about work-life balance, right? If you are tweeting while you're walking, or tweeting when you're thinking about it, right? Are you tweeting, are you Instagramming, whatever, in the middle of the night, right? Do we put up boundaries? Are we aware of the boundaries about that? And does that predispose students to a particular type of culture? I used to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had little kids, so I'd get going on my work, and I'd just email as I was going, and the students would respond to me. And it was years later that I realized that this was very unhealthy. I was modeling the wrong thing, right? So now when I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm emailing, I schedule them to go out at like a reasonable hour. So I forgot it's being live streamed and documented. So,
I have one more thing I want
so
to
what
add
are your
about.
thoughts about the impact of culture and your behaviors on the culture that we're creating?
Yeah, exactly. This comes into the value statements that we make around this and who decides value. Right now, I mean, science at large kind of self-defines what's valued as being a scientist. Like it's kind of self-defined by promotion tenure and sort of the traditional norms of the thing. And in a way, I mean, that's kind of gotten us to be driven to generate our units, which are publishable things. And you know the value of this, like culturally at large, when you pay the $3,000 article processing charge to publish your paper, which is behind a paywall, that you just paid to publish yourself. Like no one's paying you for it. You're paying money to put your work out into the world. Whereas science communication, if you do basically the same work, but you package a narrative and well package it, and put that out into the world, people will pay you for it. You can get a book deal. They'll give you an advance. Last 2019, I generated about $12,000 in media licensing fees directly from the media that I produce that's from my science and from me doing my science and packaging it in a way. People pay me for it, right? And so that's a real demonstration of value of it. And the same work goes into the same stream at which I have to pay people to, put my journal article in their journal. But science communication can really be rethinking sort of what is the cultural purpose of it, and how do you derive cultural value? Do you only define your value as a scientist to the culture of science in which you operate, the professional sphere? And if you open that up, beyond that, you can realize real value in your work. You can prove value to promotion tenure committees and say, like, not only has this been media exposure, but it's actually bringing value to the university, and all these funds go back into my lab, to my students, to do more of this. And it's actually a physical way of sort of declaring value of what you do as a researcher, as a scientist.
Adrian wrote a piece on this that ran in Nature recently as well.
Right, yeah.
So you may have heard of it, Nature.
In response to your comment about being obsessed with this stuff and being up in the middle of the night and that thing, I know from my personal life, when I first started getting into Twitter and Instagram for academic reasons, there was this weird obsession with like, oh my goodness, I don't have that many people. I'm exposing myself to entering this platform with 0 followers or 1. Like, that's a lot of exposure, because immediately you come into the game and it looks like you're a nobody. I had to just relax and let that go, and just to realize this thing will happen on its own. And those numbers are not a reflection of the impact of your work. And that's I had to tell myself that over and over again. It's easy to slip in really quick to that kind of like numbers game of followers and obsess with that. And so I think across the board, we have to just set into that and reflect on that. And that's why I would if I could go back and tell myself, when you get into this, just keep those blinders on. Do not care about how many followers you have or how many people, anything that you do, staying up late, thinking about the next creative tweet or post. Cut it out and just be you. Just present your work.
Oh, this is actually a detail from when we were back on time management is just to put out there that there are apps out there that will automatically post from one to another in terms of our time management, and how do we possibly post, to Twitter and Instagram, et cetera, and they're out there. I use one of them, and it is quite a time saver, and you can manage it. You don't have to automatically post everything that you post to one platform to another. You can control that, but why do the same post twice or 3 times to different platforms? So just to look for those.
Just to steer it a little bit away from social media and going to what Matt was saying is trying to get people to really look for ways to communicate their work that really is enjoyable to them. So I was just wondering about op-eds, and I know I'm really old school. And so to what extent do op-eds, I personally love reading op-eds, especially because of the timeliness element to them on particular topics of the day. And I've thought about creating an assignment for our graduate students that have them do an op-ed to get practice as sort of like, because it's really like a little mini essay, right? And so to what extent have you all done op-eds? Have you worked with faculty to do op-eds? To what extent does that get sort of interesting new traction? I mean, obviously the prominent op-eds, are in the prominent newspapers, whatever, New York Times, Washington Post, but just curious about that.
I've worked with quite a few faculty on op-eds. I do not ghostwrite op-eds. Nobody in my office ghostwrites op-eds for people. However, I do have like a file that I wrote many years ago. It's been modified, but only slightly. Just sort of tips on how to write an op-ed or how not to write an op-ed. And I will, edit or take a look and let people know what I think. And also, very often people don't understand that different publications have different requirements for op-ed submissions, right? So they might say, they might cap it at 400 words at one place, someplace else it might be 1,800 words, right? And that's a heck of a difference. So, we're primarily focused on helping people fine-tune their message, sort of make sure that it's an op-ed and not, a screed or a rant, and help them submit it. But I think they can be tremendously valuable. They can have a lot of reach.
Two things quickly, about the op-ed. I think they're very powerful. And so if you have an op-ed placed in the News and Observer, I think probably every legislative chief of staff has probably seen that. And so if you have a need for funding, or if there's a state water issue or a climate issue, however they come down on it, those people who are gonna make decisions about that sort of thing are going to read that. So I think it's still very powerful. It's an old school tool, totally. So I'm giving away my age here, but I think it could be useful. But the second thing, and I work with Matt, by the way, so we're the part of the news team here. There's an organization called The Conversation, theconversation.com. It's not quite an op-ed, but it's a place where you can actually place your research. Most of the posts are 800 words-ish, could be a little bit longer. Usually you use some art inside of it. The cool thing about The Conversation is we're partnering with The Conversation, so as NC State faculty member, they're gonna look at your idea and give it a boost above other ideas that they might have. When you publish on theconversation.com, though, all those pieces are available. They have a deal worked out with the Associated Press. So Associated Press gets a chance, so all Associated Press related newspapers get a chance to grab that content. So you might actually see that on an op-ed page in a newspaper anywhere across the country. So two kind of ideas. I think the op-ed is a good idea, and again, as Matt said, we can help you think about how to shape those. We're not gonna write them for you, but we can tell you, think you're onto something here or not, and then with The Conversation, we can help get you connected with a pitch to The Conversation so that they may run it, so.
And I think we're coming to the end of our time here, so I think we have time for maybe one or maybe two more questions. But I think
one thing that we haven't touched on a whole lot is oral communication of science. And I work at the graduate school, and for about 5 years, we've been doing a competition with our students where they have 3 minutes to explain their research. to a general audience, and then we judge and choose winners. We're going to do this for faculty for the first time in the spring, and I'd love to see how many of you would step up and explain your research program in 3 minutes. Thanks.
That's going to be super fun.
It's funny you mentioned that. I recently did a podcast, and I only retweeted it once because I don't know what to do with it. It's so different for me, and it's living. It's there with this organization's all their guest speakers and stuff, and it's just a strength. Even though I listen to them myself because I participated, I don't know exactly how to do with it. So it's interesting that you're mentioning this like oral component, because it is its own kind of strange thing, because they can exist online, you can link them to other things, but it is a different kind of experience receiving that content. It's not anything you can go in kind of, ooh, I didn't like how I said that, let me go and edit. No, it's there, so.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you all for attending, and thank you for our panelists for showing up today and sharing so much of your wisdom and your opinions with us. And thanks to the Research and Innovation Group for their support.